Standing Committee for this evening. I would call the Standing Committee to order. And to begin, today we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth, our ancestors, and the love of all creation. First up, we have the adoption of the agenda. I have one small addition under other business that the mayor will be speaking to. So the motion is that the content of the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee agenda for January 13, 2020 be adopted as presented. Thank you, Councillor Hanlon, Mayor Saunderson. Any other changes or preferences? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Next up, declarations of pecuniary interest. Is there anyone with pecuniary interest to declare? And if not, we all know the process. If something comes up, you should direct or let the chair know that you wish to declare. Is there any business arising from the previous meeting? Seeing none, brings us right to deputations. So we are very pleased to invite Janet Fairbridge to the podium this evening to talk about a new initiative, proposed initiative. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good evening to everyone. Very brief and somewhat informal proposal for you this evening on behalf of Hospice Georgian Triangle Foundation, but also for all of the other charities, service groups, and special interest groups in town. I wanted to bring to your attention something that our neighbours to the south in the city of Toronto, something that they do that I think might work well here in Collingwood. Krista has some photos that I'd like to share with you. The first one is an example of a parking receipt from the city of Toronto. And on the back of it is this image that you see on the screen, one from the Humber River Hospital Foundation, an opportunity for advertising regarding that particular foundation and the good work that they do. And of course, if you want to just flip to the one from Collingwood, Krista, if you would, our fabulous parking receipts, one that I purchased in the fall, but something that I would like to propose is the opportunity for local charities to be able to advertise on the reverse of the parking receipts for the town of Collingwood. Within the city of Toronto, they work with a group called Statements Media, and my understanding is it's a partnership with the Toronto Parking Authority and Statements Media to make this kind of advertising available in the city of Toronto. And it would certainly be something that I think charities in Collingwood and in perhaps the greater South Georgia Bay area would be very interested in. And if something like this were to go through, Hospice Georgian Triangle Foundation would be very honoured to be the first in line to be able to take advantage of such a thing. I spoke in the fall briefly with Bylaw Department, and Dave Zinistra, who was very helpful in my initial questions, and he suggested that I bring this idea to you, and so here I am with that information.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any questions for Janet on that? Yep, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much, your chairship. Two questions actually. First of all, I assume that there is a cost to the printing, so who covers the cost?
The City of Toronto wouldn't release that information to me without going through the Statements Media company and doing a whole formal sort of request, and so I didn't actually get that far. But I expect that there would be a cost. Shops, would they be able to shoulder a large cost for this? I doubt it, but I think it would be something that a lot of the charities would consider assisting in the payment for those advertising opportunities. I really don't know what the actual cost is at this point.
And second question, is there a standard duration that any advertiser would be on the back of parking receipts? Or is that something that changes or is negotiated? Or?
My understanding with City of Toronto is it is a pay-to-play, so it depends on what the organizations are willing to, how much their budgets will allow. Perhaps with the town of Collingwood and with local charities, we could do it on a rotational basis. set a time frame where charities might be allowed to do such and then move on to the next.
Thank you. Just Chair, through you, just to relevant staff, I assume that there is a cost in printing these receipts anyway, and I'm wondering if not, I'm sure we don't have that information at our fingertips, but it would be interesting to know what the town is paying for printing of parking receipts right now.
Okay, Councillor Hanlon?
I think it's a great idea. I have a question through you, Madam Chair, to staff. And that is, I have noticed it in our budget the last 2 years, some reference to changing up our parking system. And I'm wondering if anyone can speak to the timing of that and whether we will have receipts in the fullness of time.
Okay, so a couple questions, and I see our CEO moving closer to the mic.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the timing is at least a year or so away. We're contemplating moving towards more of an app-based, electronic-based parking system. Notwithstanding that, though, I think this is something that we could consider in the interim, and there still is going to be a transition period. I don't suspect it will have a fully automated electronic system in the next, in the short term. So we still may have to run part of the system for some time.
Thank you. So I didn't want to let this deputant go, because sometimes they go and nothing's done. So I was wondering if it's appropriate to ask for, I'm not sure, I think I'm asking for a staff report to come back to us on how this could work. Is this the time for that?
And if we can just hold that, I'm just going to offer if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question or come up to speak with respect to the initiative, and if there's not, then we'll move to some form of staff direction. Is there anyone in the gallery who would like to ask a question or speak to this deputation information? Okay, seeing none. So Councillor Hanlon, you're requesting a staff report?
Yes, on how we could bring this forward.
If there's any opportunities, okay, and a seconder. Deputy Mayor Hull, all those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. You will hear from us.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care. So that brings us to item number 6, which is staff reports, and the first is P2020-01, part law control exemption bylaw regarding Eden Oak McNabb Indigo Estates subdivision, blocks 269 and 275 to 283 of registered plan 51M1162, and it is town file number D1206519, and I'll ask Director Fire to speak to it.
Madam Chair, this is a part lot control application for the division of 55 town home lots in the Eden Oak McNabb subdivision. The area is, I guess, falls generally within the middle of the development, and is a common administrative action taken by council to effect the division of these. The proposal is consistent with the zoning and the official plan and the subdivision plan for this development.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, before we move to have our consider the recommendation, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak to this file? Okay. Seeing none, that staff report P2020-01 be received, and that council enact and pass a part law control exemption bylaw to allow for the creation of 55 lots for townhouse dwelling units within the Eden Oak McNabb Indigo Estates subdivision, P2020-01 part control Eden Oak McNabb Indigo Estates. Mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor and Mayor, and discussion. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions in regard to this. I realize that it's a fairly easy, or what's the word I'm looking for, normal application process, but I had wanted to know if it represented any change to the planned number of or dwelling types for these particular blocks. And also, I had wanted to know, notwithstanding the fact that these blocks are not adjacent to Brock and Lockhart, streets. There had been a number of significant issues back when this plan was first approved, and there were some agreements made in regard to mitigation of drainage issues and tree preservation where possible, an erection of retaining wall and or boundary fence. And I'm just wondering if all of those have been taken care of, dealt with, addressed.
Okay, and, okay, I'll just pass that through to Director Farr to respond, please.
Sure, Madam Chair, through Madam Chair to Councillor Doherty. The part lot control application doesn't change the plan number or type of dwelling units in the subdivision plan. The blocks as you see are there internal to the site, and it doesn't pertain to any of the boundary lots, but the conditions relating to trees, the erection of the retaining wall, and the boundary fence have been fulfilled. For those lots along the periphery, in terms of the drainage conditions, the developer's working towards fulfilling them, but they can't be entirely fulfilled until the dwellings are built and the final lot grading is completed.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, 6.2 is P 2020-02, the process for evaluating landowner requests to include redesignation of their lands as part of the official plan update project. And again, I'll ask Director Farr to give us an overview of this request.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the title indicates, this is a report that sets out a proposed evaluation framework for Council to consider requests that might be made by property owners throughout the official plan update to have their properties redesignated as part of that process to essentially piggyback on the official plan update rather than file individual applications. This process has been set forth here in this report for your consideration, and it's done so as a result of a couple of matters. There are questions first of whether or not an application that does get considered through the official plan update, where it should otherwise be considered through an independent application, is properly reviewed and its merits are fully evaluated, and potentially that the public has a clear understanding of the matter associated with it, rather than being sort of subsumed within the overall official plan update. The second is the question and issue of whether it's fair to other developers to allow kind of a piggybacking of one proposal on the publicly funded process. Independent applications are subject to application fees, pre-consultation, and a sort of a specific and separate process. These applications, as I said, are the subject of the recommendations in this report. I need to note to you that throughout the official plan update process, there are going to be applications that are processed that have already been filed and we're currently reviewing. There will be others that come along that will be independently filed, likely within the official plan update process, and those are typically dealt with through the standard Planning Act process and will come before committee and council as they do in the regular course. The applications I'm talking about here are not those. These are ones where an owner would request to essentially piggyback. So the process that's been set out is that in the event someone was to make this type of request, we will receive those through council officially so that they're more considered transparently. Council would then refer that matter to my position, the Director of Planning and Building Services and the Planning Consultant, to consider whether or not those applications were minor being applications that fall within the general purview of the overall official plan exercise or considered to be in the general best interests of the town or generally minor nature, or alternately those of a major character that ought more appropriately to be viewed as independent applications. They carry a complexity and set of dynamics that would suggest that they should be treated independently. When those requests were referred to the consultant and the position of the director, we would then make a determination and advise council accordingly how those issues were being handled. The process set out in front of you indicates that it's possible that a request could be made throughout the official plan update where everyone agrees that what's being proposed is in the best interest of the town, and the process allows for an exemption from this, so that those things could in fact be considered as part of the official plan update because they are considered in the best interests of the community.
Okay, thank you. Right, before council does their deliberation, is there anyone in the gallery who would like to come and speak to this file? Okay, seeing none, then our recommendation is that staff report P 2020-02, process for evaluating landowner requests to include redesignation of their lands as part of the official plan update project dated January 13, 2020 be received, and further that the process set out within this report for evaluating landowner requests to include redesignation of their lands as part of the official plan update project be approved. Can I move her in a seconder, please? Mayor Saunderson, Councillor Doherty, council questions. Mayor Saunderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Adam. If I'm reading this report right, my understanding is that any existing applications or applications that are brought before our official plan update is approved by the county would be adjudicated or determined based on the current official plan that's in place now. And until we switch plans, the applications are done under the existing plan.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. All existing and any application filed before the new official plan is adopted and approved by the county would be treated under the existing official plan.
So then, just so I'm clear, if there is an application that's deemed to be minor or in the broader public interest, by allowing us to include it as part of our OP update, we're actually allowing that application to be judged under our future plan. Is that a way to, it's a transitional provision, or I'm just trying to come to grips with how it's going to affect the process on the ground?
Through you, Madam Chair, Mayor Saunderson, a proposed redesignation in that case where a request was made would not take effect until the official plan was approved and received approval by the county.
So it's a way then for us to actually entertain a current request that would we deem to be part of our official plan update, but it would not come into force until the new plan is in place.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? The only question that I had to you, Director Farr, was there was a bit of discussion in the report about typically a person making an application outside of the update would have costs. Are there any costs that someone making a request through the update should be covering?
Madam Chair, I think that would be something generally that we would evaluate on its merits. It certainly wouldn't involve an application fee because it would be part of the official plan update. I can't say for sure, but perhaps there might be a consulting study or something associated with it, and there might be a request for some financial contribution toward the exercise, but I can't say definitively right now.
But we wouldn't be assuming those costs. We would ensure that they were passed on.
Well, that's not necessarily true. If there was a request that coincided directly with the municipality's objectives, there's the potential that the municipality could use its consulting budget to evaluate and process that proposal within the context of the overall official plan update. Equally though, if there were detailed studies that were costly and it was viewed as an appropriate measure to seek some sort of financial participation from the property owner, we could consider that. But as I say, I can't say definitively now. It would be an option we would consider at the time such a request was made.
Great, thank you. All right, so if there's no other questions then, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And that brings us up to our another department, PW 2020-01, the Master Servicing Plan for Water and Sanitary Sewer Systems. And I'll turn over to our new director, Slama, to set this up for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Manager of Engineering John Velick will be giving the presentation tonight on the Master Servicing Plan. He was the lead on this project. So this report is the completion of 2 years of work, identifying what kind of servicing needs we need to support growth into the future. And we also have Christine Hill here from Cole Engineering, and she's the project manager and lead engineer as our consultant.
Thank you, Peggy. Through you, Madam Chair. I'd like to present an overview and obtain council endorsement of our master servicing plan for sanitary and water. This plan has been prepared as per the master plan process outlined in the municipal EA document. Council endorsement is typically required for this type of master plan. The objective of this study is to determine what sanitary and water servicing upgrades are required to service future growth. Slide. So the study comprised of 6 main steps. The first was to produce an inventory of water and sanitary assets, and we used our GIS database, our as-built drawings, and field surveys to do this. Next, we collected sanitary flow data at 12 monitoring locations for a period of 6 months. Water pressure data loggers were also installed to monitor the drinking water system. Next, hydraulic computer models were built for both systems, which were calibrated using the flow monitoring data collected. We reviewed potential development within the town boundary and determined future servicing requirements. Next, we looked at potential servicing opportunities of neighboring municipalities. We included the town of New Tecumseh, Blue Mountain, and Clearview. And finally, we produced a list of required projects, timeframes, and costs. So it's the existing water system. Our current water system generally meets a satisfactory level of service. It is noted that the maximum day water demands are approaching 80% of the water treatment plant capacity, and this is a trigger for plant expansion. The system has sufficient storage and pumping capacity, has adequate fire flows. The one main issue is the lack of the larger diameter water main loop to provide redundancy. Next. The existing sanitary system meets an acceptable level of service in most instances. The major system constraints is the peak treatment capacity at the wastewater treatment plant due to excessive infiltration and inflow during larger storms, and this is mainly due to the age of our system. Wastewater treatment plant is currently operating at 63% of its capacity, and all of our pumping stations have adequate capacity. Next, we determined future system demands by adding existing demands to future development growth, and you'll recognize this map from, next slide please, Krista. Recognize this map from, it was what we use in our master transportation study, and it represents all the potential development that could occur over the next 20 or so years. The blue is the anticipated developments by 2032, and the yellow represents anticipated developments to be constructed by 2044. By 2044, we anticipate a residential population of just over 43,000. We also looked at built boundary growth. So this map shows the extent of developable areas within the built boundary, which could be developed after 2044. The built boundary adds approximately 16,000 people, so that by 2064, the estimated population would be just over 59,000. A less detailed analysis of these areas was conducted due to the uncertainty created by forecasting so far in the future. Next slide. So future needs, future water needs. An upgrade to the water treatment plant is needed to meet current supply commitments. Additional storage is needed in Zone 1. Zone 1 is the majority of town, including the downtown. Additional pumping capacity is needed in Zones 2 and 3, which include the newer development areas, mostly in the West End. New water mains are also needed to service growth areas both in the downtown and the peripheries of the municipality. Future sanitary needs. Additional sanitary treatment capacity will be triggered when the average flow reaches 80% of the plant's rated capacity, and this is projected to occur in 2032. There are also various sanitary sewers which require upsizing and reconfiguring. As part of the environmental assessment process, servicing alternatives were derived and presented to the public during the Public Information Center. Comments were received and incorporated in the report where appropriate, and alternatives were evaluated with respect to their technical merit, natural environment impacts, social and heritage impacts, and financial impacts. Slide. Recommended water projects. So these are improvements to service development to 2044. Water efficiency measures, expansion of the water treatment plant, construction of the Stewart Road booster station, pump improvements at the Carmichael booster pump station on Highway 26, decommissioning of the Georgian Meadows pump station once the Stewart Road reservoir is online, new elevated water tank along High Street, which would include the decommissioning of the existing tower on Hume, 6 trunk water main upgrades, 14 local water main upgrades, and 9 system valve upgrades. Recommended sanitary projects, expansion of the wastewater treatment plant, including improvements to the outfall pipe, a new force main from Black Ash pump station to the treatment plant, upsizing of the sewer on Huron, Ontario from Campbell to Collins, adjustments to the sewer on Old Mountain Road in Balsam, upsizing of the sewer on Minnesota Street south of Huron, and an inflow and infiltration reduction program. This is a program designed to reduce the amount of surface water and groundwater for entering the sanitary system. Slide. At the request of some of our neighbor municipalities, we've reviewed our ability to provide them with servicing. System upgrade requirements and costs have been developed to provide servicing to the town of New Tecumseh, Clearview, and the town of Blue Mountains. This by no means commits us to providing servicing. It was strictly a feasibility review. Next slide. We also looked at servicing unserviced areas. So within the town, there are 5 areas where residents have municipal water but no municipal sanitary servicing. For each area, options have been evaluated and preferred servicing schemes and cost estimates have been developed. Generally, it's difficult to service these areas due to shallow bedrock, water crossings, and just low elevations in relation to the water treatment plant. Next slide. So the next steps are to post the master plan for public review. This has already occurred, and the review period ends January 20th. Assuming we get endorsement from the committee tonight, we would like to take we would like to look for council approval or endorsement of the master plan at the January 27th council meeting. The findings of the report would be incorporated into the development charge bylaw. This has already been done. It would be incorporated into the capital budget, which has already started in 2020. We need to initiate Schedule CEA for the water treatment plant. This process has already begun. We need to initiate Schedule CEA for the water treatment plant when it reaches 80% capacity. And finally, this plan should be reviewed every 5 years. So we plan on revisiting the study in 2025 and 2030. Questions? I'm happy to answer.
Okay. So before we entertain council's questions, I'll just ask if there's anyone in the gallery who would like to ask a question with respect to this very large, complex report. Seeing none, then the recommendation is the council receive staff report PW 2020-01 Master Servicing Plan for Water and Sanitary Sewer Systems for information, and the council approve the Master Servicing Plan for Water and Sanitary Sewer Systems as required under the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment Process, Master Planning Process, Approach Number 1. A mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Hamlin. Okay, questions for Mr. Bellick. Deputy Mayor.
Two very basic questions, maybe one for clarification. Clearly I was or I was wrong in my thinking, but I was surprised when I saw that the current capacity was 63% for our sanitary system, and that 2032 was the projection for full capacity. So have there been improvements? Because I was under the impression when I go back to like 2010 that we were kind of zeroing in on full capacity now.
Yes, and through the chair, you're correct. What we saw though was a reduction in some of the industrial uses, some of the larger industrial uses, so that freed up a lot of capacity.
And the second one is that water was put in a number of years ago to the east, I guess the most eastern part of the municipality that was highlighted in the green. And I can appreciate your comment in terms of the complexities of putting in maybe the sanitary. Are there ways of doing it that you can actually create a system that would be above ground perhaps, or in some type of other form that would move that? Because there is a lot of land down there to be opened up that would increase assessment.
Through the chair, above ground, I'm not aware of any techniques or methods. Below ground, you could have a low pressure system, which would require your infrastructure. It wouldn't have to be installed as deep, so you wouldn't have as much rock removal. And we've looked at those options in the report, and that's actually, we're recommending a combination of gravity and low pressure system.
Maybe a very quick follow-up. Between now and that council meeting, is it possible to get this presentation here? But secondly, the appendices are 300 pages plus, and I'm just wondering if we could get maybe, here are 10 bullet points as key highlights.
With respect to servicing in the East End,
No, my apologies. Your report was 180 pages, and the two appendices were 300 plus pages each. I'm just wondering for the two appendices, if we could get just like, here are 10 bullet points to focus in on.
sure. So to clarify, a copy of the presentation and 10 bullet points summarizing the appendices.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor Saunderson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, through you to John. So just so I can get kind of a high level understanding, really what we're looking at here, this is almost like an asset management plan roadmap for us in terms of the improvements and changes we're going to have to make to our system as our planned growth increase happens.
Correct.
And so really what we're doing is looking at what the expectation is for the build out and the cost to put those supports in place. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it. So we're going through the official plan review now, and you've looked at under section 3 here, applicable policy and legislation. We've looked at the growth plan or our official plan. So moving forward, if there's changes in that, does that have an impact on this on the ground?
Most of the recommendations over the next 5 years we would have required anyway. I think Christine can speak. She's gone through this with other municipalities with respect to the order of which one you do first. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg, because you need this plan to feed into the OP, but you also need the OP to feed into this plan. So I'll let Christine speak to this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. So typically a master plan is done after an OP. So in effect, this master plan reflects the last OP and the works that are required. And typically what we would do is look at growth projections and then project out what would be required. There have been a number of municipalities that have tried to do the two together, an OP update and a master servicing plan concurrently. There typically is a mismatch in terms of the completion of the OP, because there's much technical work to do after the OP is complete at any rate. So there's often a lag between when an OP is completed and when a master servicing plan is completed. So in effect, you've now got about a 2-year lag in your the difference between your OP and your master servicing plan. I think in terms of the recommendations that we've made, many of them are going to move forward regardless of any changes you make in the OP. And I would anticipate that the major recommendations, the new water plant needs to move forward now at any rate.
Good, thank you. And just to follow up on the new water plant discussion, because we do have the agreement with ETEC coming forward, and there's a cost sharing arrangement in that. When we looked at the contributions for water for other municipalities, Town of Blue Mountains and Clearview, will those also be factored in, or is those costs in terms of capital improvements that our taxpayers will be bearing? Is there a sharing arrangement there, or how is that addressed?
Yes, those costs are delineated within the report, or estimated within the report.
Good.
They haven't been negotiated with them, and it's
But
just
they'd be factored in.
an estimate of what it would cost both for distribution and for treatment.
Okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Hammond?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to John as well. Thank you for the study. It's quite an in-depth analysis, and I have been thinking a lot, and we've been going back and forth, of course, about what will happen with our growth plan. But I do appreciate the amount of work that's been done about the existing system. And I just wanted to make sure that my question is, like, is staff considering this a bit of a living document Because I think none of us want to get into a situation where we're seeing major infrastructure pipes or whatever being put out and sized to a particular area when really we're all thinking, you know, the next wave, I'll say, of population is going to be over here.
It is, through the chair, it is a working document. There are a lot of assumptions made. Development can slow down, it can speed up. Official plans can change, so it's absolutely a living document, but we need to revisit every 5 years. This document is the first Collingwood has ever done to this level of detail, and to update it would not be it would be a smaller scope than this plan done here.
Again, sort of as a follow-up to that, so once our official plan process is completed and we see if there's any changes to the underlying assumptions of your study, would it be appropriate to be asking your department at that time to be revisiting it?
Yeah, we could look at that, yes.
Okay, thank you. Also, I have a question about the 5 areas that are shown to be improved with sanitary servicing. And I was hoping, so my question has to do with, and a bit of a springboard off of what our deputy mayor said, that there'll be a lot of lands that could be opened up. And that before we get too far down that road from your department's perspective, if you could consider bringing it to council so we can have a discussion around what are the potentials for those areas, and whether, for example, we should be putting in servicing for 600 homes in the Beechwood area, if in fact, you know, there's some analysis that could be done that maybe supported 1,000. You know, I'm just throwing those out, it might not be relevant. But.
Yeah, this study looks at the overall strategy, so whether we're putting in 600 or 1,000, the idea is that it's still going to be a mixture of a low pressure system and a gravity system. You're still going to have a pump station at the Bateau River, you're still going to have a pump station at the Blue Shores development. Those things all remain the same. You're just going to change your pump sizes, you're going to change your pipe diameters, all those things would remain the same. The general strategy would remain the same, it's just the details would change.
Okay, because my point, Madam Chair, is simply that I'd hate to see us investing in the sizing of certain pipes when really if we were looking at what should happen in the fullness of time in this area that currently isn't serviced, we may see a different scenario unfolding. Let me just see if there was something else here. The recommendations at the end of the report, I know in our exchange you indicated those, if we adopt this plan, these are the recommendations that would be coming forward. So are these 8 things, are these the things that are in, we've seen in our capital works plan this year?
Yes, some of them are. Everything within the 10-year time frame has been included in our 10-year capital plan.
Okay,
And some of the items are going to be constructed next year or designed, or this year.
those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Doherty, did I see your hand?
Yes, you did, thank you. And through you to Mr. Bellick. Most of my questions have also been answered around the table, but there were a couple of questions that came to me in regard to environmental concerns, so relative to the wastewater treatment plant. And the one question was, although it is extremely rare, we do have the potential to have bypass events whereby water will flow directly past our treatment facility and into Georgian Bay. Again, I acknowledge that this is extremely rare, but it is a concern nonetheless. And what I understood was that a lot of this may have to do, or at least could be mitigated by immediate action to reduce infiltration and inflow. So is that a project that we would be initiating in the very near term?
Through the chair, this is something we always work towards through our development standards, through construction practices through our annual sanitary renewal program. And we do have an item in the budget this year to do some more localized flow monitoring. It's very difficult to reduce I&I. It's very difficult to pinpoint the sources, whether it's from foundation drains or sump pumps, or whether it's from water getting into them in through the maintenance holes. So you really have to do localized flow monitoring to pinpoint what the source is. And sometimes the source is outside of our control. It could be on private property, someone's service, could have loose joints. It's very difficult to pinpoint and very difficult to deal with, but it's something we work towards on multiple fronts through every year.
And when we find situations where it is occurring, are we asking, and if it's, especially if it's private, are we asking the private property owner to take steps immediately?
It's very difficult because you don't know if that service is leaking or not without actually sending a camera up it. So it's very difficult on a house-to-house level to know which house the flows are coming from, and that's why you need to do that localized monitoring and try and understand based on response times where that water is coming from. Is it coming a day after a storm, which would indicate it's a sump pump? Is it coming half a day after a storm? It could be a leaky service. Is it coming immediately? It could be a manhole. So it's very difficult to ascertain, and if you do find a property owner that does have a leaky service, how do you force them to fix it? That's a challenge.
Right. But it's a challenge we might have to address.
Yes.
Okay, and finally, through you,
So, Councillor Doherty, Director Thom, did you want to address that point? Yes, okay, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to Councillor Doherty, I was just going to mention, right, that the progress that the town has made with their sanitary renewal program has addressed a lot of the, has addressed some I&I issues in the town, and so we're continuing with that, with those projects in mind to help improve it as best we can, what's in our control.
Yeah, in 2010, there was a lot of relining done, a lot of relining work done. We had every meter of our sanitary system cameraed, and there was a lot of relining done and smoke testing in the downtown to determine sources in the old downtown area. So there has been a lot of progress made in the last 15, 20 years.
my final question was, within this study, there was no reference to improved wastewater treatment processes, because as I understand it, there are other more robust processes that are available, but we did not consider those. Can we speak to that? Because obviously we want to ensure that the water that's going back into Georgian Bay is absolutely the cleanest that it can be.
Yes, and Peggy, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we go to expand the wastewater treatment plant, improved processes are now a requirement of MECP, so we will of course implement those.
Okay, good.
But it's not something we can, it's not something we can do in the interim. It would be when we expand the plant.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions that have come up? Okay, I think they've pretty well been covered. All right, so then all those in favor of the recommendation as read previously, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, John and Peggy, for your work on that, and Christine for being here. All right, so number 7, we have no reports or minutes of other committees or boards, which brings us to correspondence. There's one, 8.1, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing RIA discussion paper on transforming and modernizing the delivery of Ontario's building code services. And I guess I would need a mover and a seconder to receive that. Mayor Saunderson, Councillor Doherty, all those in favor of it? Oh, yep, and oh, sorry, anybody wishing to speak to it?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Adam, and this seems to me like a positive initiative to look at providing more nimble responses to building code updates and questions. And I know that Director Miller is not here, but they're looking for feedback and from stakeholders. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity, or if there'd be, if Greg's had an opportunity to review this and look at making any recommendations.
I apologize, Mr. Reid, could you please repeat that question?
Yes, they're looking for a consultation for this advisory board to make updates to the building code more timely and nimble, and I'm just wondering if our building inspector, chief inspector, Greg Miller would have any input or is aware of this.
Through you, Madam Chair, Greg is being, the chief building official has been paying close attention to the changes in the building code. He's been attending all the orientation sessions, most likely very well aware, and I can follow up with an update on that.
Good, and I'm just, if he does have, I'm hoping that if he does have some recommendations, that he'll participate in the consultation, is really where I'm headed. Yeah, thanks.
All right, thank you. Councillor Dorr?
Yes, thank you, and through you too, Director Farr. This letter implies to me that authority is being taken away from the municipality to some degree. Is that a correct interpretation?
Through you, Madam Chair,
Sorry.
I'm not prepared to comment on that right now.
I think that they're simply looking to create a more efficient process, and what they hear back from hopefully the communities they listen to in this process and carry forward. I mean, it's we don't know for sure what the outcome's going to be. Mayor Saunderson?
Yeah, as I read it, and just having been involved with some discussions about environmental issues with Minister Yorick, they're looking at, my understanding is they're looking at ways to try and improve the building code. Right now, the building code just defines your minimal standards, and so unless we change those standards for environmental or climate change concerns, they're not there. So I think the purpose of this advisory panel is to look at ways to making changes more quickly, more responsive, and getting them through. So I don't think it anticipates removing any authority from the municipality, because right now we're just enforcing what's in the building code. I think this is looking at making changes to the building code. That's my read of it, and I think maybe talk to Greg Miller about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. And I failed to ask if there was anyone in the audience who would like to, before I ask for the vote, is there anyone who wished to speak to this correspondence? Okay, seeing none. All right, all those in favor of receiving the correspondence, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So departmental updates, is there anything further from either? I know it's new in the new year, we're just getting things up and running again, but we will look forward to something in the world of economic development and business development at a future meeting. All right, public delegations. Anyone out there want to speak to us about anything that wasn't on the agenda, or? Okay, excellent. And so that brings us to other, oh, sorry, Wendy, come on up.
We have some questions about infilling on properties, like on the building of these massive houses. How much of the lot is to be taken up by the house and the garage? What percentage?
Thank you, and we'll put that through to Director Farr.
Through you, Madam Chair, the lot coverage on a particular zone is defined in the zoning bylaw. It's applicable to the property unless it's been adjusted by way of a minor variance.
What do you guys consider to be a minor variance? Because to me, a minor variance is something that's kind of less than a meter, not 7-something meters. We're stuck with this across the street from us, and we're not very happy. What was presented to us and what is being built are two very different things.
Okay.
We have the plan. with us, and it was given to us in our 2018 tax bill.
Okay.
Now the build is taking place, and we were supposed to remember back to 2018.
Okay. All right, so I think because that's with a specific property and without having the knowledge of the request before tonight, what I'll perhaps ask, if it's satisfactory, is that you go offline directly with Director Farr and he can answer your questions specific to the location, the zoning, and the build.
Yes, it's,
Would that be okay? All right, thank you.
when do I just?
You can touch base as soon as we finish here, we have other business, and then you can coordinate a time to meet. Okay? All right, thank you. Yes, Councilor Hamlin.
I have a question of staff arising out of that question. We've had a few times at our council where the issue of, having some rules, more current rules around infill housing have come up, and when we should be dealing with bringing forward those rules. And we've had some discussion around whether that's just part of our official plan process or not. I happened to ask our consultant during my time with them last week about that, and he felt, at least at that time, that the official plan really wasn't a place to be doing rules for infill housing. So with that in mind, and knowing I'm sure all of us get questions all the time from residents about the lack of rules as they perceive them for infill housing. I'm just wondering if staff could advise us whether there's a good time for us to be bringing forward now a review of appropriate zoning policies in this regard.
Okay, all right, I will put that through to Director Farr. My understanding from one of the questions was that perhaps a redevelopment of the urban design standard more reflective of neighborhoods as opposed to an overall community design process might be better, if that would address, because I know part of what I brought up was people have come to me who are upset about bungalows and wartime homes coming down and really huge homes going within a neighborhood that it doesn't necessarily reflect the character of that neighborhood. But anyway, I'll allow Director Farr, do you want to answer that? Do you want to come back to us at some point with the best way to approach that?
I can provide you with a brief answer now. So through Madam Chair to Councillor Hamlin. The matter that you're raising is a matter that's appeared in a number of communities where there's a reinvestment, redevelopment in existing residential areas. And typically the response where that issue has emerged, and it's a prolific response of concern to the community, is that council may request that staff initiate what's deemed an overlay in the zoning bylaw for particular neighborhoods that sets out the reduced limits potentially for development below what exists in the existing zoning bylaw. Those are public processes, and they're subject to comments and consultation with the development industry and property owners. In a number of communities, these overlays have been implemented and address a variety of zoning matters. And it typically takes a number of months at the very least, sometimes 6 to 8, sometimes 12 months, depending on the available resources and acuity, I guess, of the acuteness of the issue in the community. Those are brought forward as kind of individual specific exercise related to the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful. I'm wondering if, through you, Madam Chair, Director Farr could perhaps come back to us with some suggestions on when would be an appropriate time for us to initiate that process. I think our residents are so keen to engage in that.
Do we need direction for that as agreed on by the committee? ask them for that stuff first? Yep. All right, so mover is Councillor Hamlin, seconder Councillor Doherty. All those in favor? Oh, sure you can.
I'm very supportive of your comments. I just, the question is more of a generic, and perhaps it's actually a question of council of the whole as opposed to committee. We, in this term of council, I think have now exceeded 30 priorities that we've directed staff. I can't speak for all 9, but I think there is a feeling around the table that this is one of the issues that's maybe hot button or trigger, if I may use those two. And I'm just wondering if perhaps we could have an opportunity to review all of the things that we've asked and reprioritize and say, here are the ones that really are the ones that we'd like to have focused on. That's my comment.
Fair enough. Yep, Mayor Saunderson.
I guess my comment would be, and through you, maybe this is a question to Councillor Hamlin, but my understanding is that the overlay is a fairly large project, involves public consultation. So I'm wondering if we're trying to identify areas or give some scope to that request, because it seems to me like a fairly broad request if we're targeting areas or if there are specific issues that we're looking at to be examined in these overlays. I agree this is a pressing issue, but it just seems to me a fairly broad recommendation that we're now addressing. I don't know if that assists staff. I think the more strategic or surgical we can be in that, I think would be helpful.
Okay, thank you.
My own sense, Madam Chair, is that we should leave the answer to that to Director Farr. It won't be something that's going to be applicable to our newer communities, because they're not right for having lots subdivided or houses knocked down. So I'm sure we could all come up with a list or a boundary of where it's going to be more relevant to. But I would like to leave that to Director Farr's discussion.
Okay. I'm sitting here thinking if we, I agree with the Deputy Mayor in terms of the asks and staff's ability to be able to prioritize what needs to be done. So I think that's something we could probably recommend to have come to council. Would make sense. I think in terms of your specific request, is it possible to ask a shorter question at this time from the director if, first of all, in timing with the OP review and the time that will take, does he see a benefit of that overlay process? And how it fits into the priorities already in place. Is that a reasonable question to ask?
I don't think so. And the only reason I say that is, I think, I've only been around the table for a year, but I just know this is something, someone said it's a hot button issue for our community. And I don't think we should wait another year or two for our official plan process to be completed. It is something that relates to our zoning bylaw. And so that's why I've framed my request as receive direction back from Director Farr on when it would be appropriate for his department to deal with this and the scope of it. Because I don't think we can sit here and come up with timing for that. I think he should.
Okay, because I think what's coming to my mind is maybe requesting for a deferral of your staff request until we have done the review that the Deputy Mayor has suggested as a council. I think that would be fair to staff.
Yeah, I would be very much in favor of receiving a list of what staff considers our asks are at the moment, because I think it would be helpful, I would expect for staff, if we could prioritize the things that are outstanding, and I'm not opposed to deferring until we receive that.
Okay, all right, I would move about chairing, is there a mover and a seconder for a deferral? Or I'll pass over the chair just to see.
I'll move the deferral.
Okay, is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor. All right, all those in favor of deferring? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you for that, Councillor Hamlin. Okay, any other business?
Yes,
Right, oh, we didn't even start with the initial other business.
it's under the term other business. So this is suggestion through you, Madam Chair, a question to Director Farr, and since we are in the OP, early stages of the OP review process, I know there's a number of municipalities that have a design review panel, which is a group of volunteer planners, architects, and landscape architects, and maybe engineers that can review some proposed developments at the discretion of the planning department to help in looking at the suitability of the development if there are issues about it. And I'm wondering if this is something that we could consider and put to our planning consultants to, if this is something we could implement here in our community.
Through you, Madam Chair, urban design is an issue that we flagged with the planning consultants, and we will be asking them to look into this matter as part of the official plan review. My understanding is that there are a number of residents in Collingwood with extensive urban design and architectural experience who could be helpful participants in the urban design, in the official plan update exercise, and provide some helpful information on urban design.
Yes, it does. And just as a follow-up, then I'm wondering if, given that we have those experts in our community, I wonder if there's a way to tap into that as part of our planning process, as well as a focus group and part of the public consultations for the official plan review. Just something that the consultants could consider.
Through you, Madam Chair, the planning consultants are exploring a whole range of different consultation approaches. And one of them is to invite individuals from the community to attend focus group meetings on various topics of interest to the town and to residents, and urban design will be one of them. So this will be quite helpful in generating fruitful discussion and ideas for the town planning team.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hammer.
And if I could just add a comment to that, Madam Chair, that I do think that is a good idea to have a design committee, and there are very experienced people in our community who I think would step forward to participate. But I believe we had something of a similar nature embedded into the waterfront master plan with respect to the shipyards development. And that was never implemented and has resulted, of course, in a project there that is monotonous in color and design. So I think what is important, if we are to bring this forward again in our official plan, is that we have some means to have it enforced and used, not just words.
Thank you. Okay, anything else under other business? Seeing none? Oh, who did I miss? Oh, sorry, thought you were done.
This is my own other business. Okay. Madam Chair, through our discussions with our consultant last week, it became apparent that one matter that's going to become relevant as we move through our official plan review process is when our existing draft approved plans of subdivision are going to expire. And so through you, I wanted to ask Director Farr if it is possible for purposes of that process to be preparing a list of such expiry dates.
Okay, Director Farr?
Through you, Madam Chair, I expect that the consultant, through the exercise of understanding the projected development and population growth, including considering the opportunities for developments to accommodate population growth to 2041, would want that information. So in concert with the official plan, my expectations would be providing that through to the consultant to assist them in doing that analysis.
And would that be made available to council as well?
Through Madam Chair, I mean, the intent would be through the consultants to consider the relevance of that information in the broader exercise of the overall official plan update. So I wouldn't envisage it specifically bringing those deadlines forward to council. However, I do expect that as draft plans of subdivision to approach their expiry date, that staff will be bringing forward reports on those matters and making appropriate recommendations.
Thank you.
All right. All right, I'm looking really carefully now. Any other business? Seeing none, who would like to adjourn? Councillor Hammond. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.